Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
A heads up to our listeners, today's interview does have a few mentions of violence, sexual assault, and suicide. Just wanted to make you aware. Thanks for listening. I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. It takes a special person to dedicate their career to working with people who have no place to lay their heads at night. Homelessness is such a complicated problem. There's no easy solution. Even giving someone a place to call home doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And we'll get into that today with our guest for the hour. Joy Flores is Vice President of Ministries at the Nashville Rescue Mission. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Joy relocated to Music City just a few years ago to apply her experience on Skid Row to downtown Nashville. Joy, welcome to This Is Nashville.
Thank you for having me, my friend.
Well, I love instant friendship here. Let's talk for a second about California, since you spent a good chunk of your life there until the last few years. So Skid Row is like nothing else in the country. I'm not sure I realized until prepping for this, but that it's like the biggest concentration of folks who are unhoused. How does it compare going from there to downtown Nashville?
That's a great question. I think Skid Row is its own ecosystem in itself. A man-made disaster, corralling and containing of folks experiencing homelessness, all being trying to get access to social services that were all put in the same area.
Well, isn't there something to, I mean, even in Nashville, we've sort of concentrated services, and I could see why that makes sense in some regards.
100%. The problem is that mental illness obviously is the biggest driving force, just in complicating the situation. But Skid Row has become an outdoor sane asylum. It's 52 square blocks. You have 4,000 people living in encampments. Trash is out of control, which brings rats, which are also out of control. And it's just, it's wild, man. It's wild.
An outdoor insane asylum, I think if you weren't somebody who has lived and breathed this for 2 decades, that would sound kind of insensitive at the moment. Why do you use language like that? And I'm guessing it's intentional.
Yeah, I would definitely say, just from my own experience walking the streets, back in the early 2000s, we could walk to coffee and it would be probably not wise for someone who didn't have firsthand experience to do something like that. But the late 2021, 22, it was just so unsafe that you wouldn't have street smarts to do something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
What changed? More a higher concentration of people, or a different kind of person who's there?
I would absolutely say the face of homelessness has changed. Much more severe, unmedicated mental illness, fentanyl and horse tranquilizer combined makes people out of their mind.
Wow. All right, so you talk about Skid Row as being this sort of man-made problem, and even things like that it's not like anyone is going hungry on Skid Row. Like, why do you point out these things to folks who maybe aren't working very closely, need to understand what the real issue is?
Mainly because all of those social services, charities, parachurch organizations are all in Skid Row as well. And you have well-meaning folks from, say a suburban church who come in and they want to feed people. And so at 9:00 in the morning, they find an empty spot on the sidewalk. They bring their table. They set up shop. They're so enthusiastic.
They're feeling great about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's say they're giving peanut butter and jelly sandwiches or something, right? Or maybe it's a home-cooked meal. And everybody gets up from their tents on the sidewalk. They get up, they get in line. They sometimes don't even know what they're getting in line for. They stand in line, they get the donation. Maybe they eat half of it. They throw half of it on the street because there's not very many trash cans, which produces the trash. And then they go back and sit down. Well, that group of volunteers doesn't know that at 11, there is another group of volunteers coming with pizza or with clothes that they didn't ask anybody the size of clothes that they need. So they're handing out things that aren't meeting a specific need. And I think when it becomes that way, it's toxic. We say, we deal with this in Nashville as well. We have folks who come to Nashville Rescue Mission on the back of our parking lot on the public sidewalk, and they do public feedings. And we say, if you do that, we know your heart is pure and your intentions are good. But if you do that, we are serving 3 hot home-cooked meals a day. And when people come inside, they also are gaining access to comprehensive services, wraparound case management. We are able to meet those long-term needs. So instead of just feeding them and focusing on the food, we focus on the relationship and use the food as a tool to build trust.
Wow. You're saying you're kind of giving them the thing without doing what you building a relationship of some kind that is going to last. Before we kind of make our trip to Music City from Skid Row, the Skid Row sounds like a place that even you are not comfortable anymore. I mean, is it? What do you mean? I've read that sexual assault has perhaps increased there. Like, it truly is dangerous, even for somebody who knows their way around.
I mean, if you're out on the street, absolutely yes. I never felt unsafe at Union Rescue Mission, which is where I worked, inside the building. We have security 24/7 and things like that to make sure that we keep our staff safe. But again, when you're building a relationship, it helps. People, you don't feel as threatened, and you have proximity.
Well, what brought you to Nashville?
Nashville Rescue Mission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you see that you wanted to take on, and what did you feel like you could bring from Skid Row experience to maybe help here?
Yeah. I think the bigger, for us, my husband and I have 4 kids at the time. 2 were in junior high, 2 going into high school, and COVID really did a number on them personally. They were out of school for 18 months. Can you imagine trying to teach a first grade, third grade, fifth grade, and 7th grader while I'm working 17 hours a day dealing with COVID over our infectious disease protocol, and they're home like with my niece? It was awesome.
Wow.
So that really, it just was taxing on us as a family. And so looking for, maybe a better quality of life, a little bit slower, more family oriented. I had never been to Nashville before 2019, 2020.
So you're one of the California
COVID
transplants.
No, don't hold it against me. I am not responsible for the traffic on the 65.
The 65. You sound very California.
But also too, my husband and I are both born and raised in LA.
Right.
We were not sellouts. So many people left really in 2020. So come on now, 2023. Yeah. It's yeah.
Well, I love that. So, what the services that are kind of around the Nashville Rescue Mission here? I mean, you've got the Campus for Human Development there, which is, a lot of people would know the Room in the Inn program that they do there. What else is sort of around you and is kind of your little Skid Row, if you want to call it that? And maybe you don't want to call it that.
Right. Well, the neighbors definitely don't want to call it that.
Right.
We are dealing with, I would say when you asked about the differences, I think that is a big difference, is that there's, and I'm not saying this is a good or a bad thing. I don't want to subject it to that, but there's a less of a tolerance for people on the street. And so there'll be one instance, and an email gets sent to and I don't want to minimize an incident that happens. I think it's still very serious, but it gets escalated very quickly, which results in action. So, and I appreciate that.
Oh, in a good way.
Yeah.
Because I could imagine that you want neighbors who are not going to be getting the police involved every day or something. But you're saying it's helpful in some ways.
Absolutely, because then you're able to bring that person inside and actually triage them and figure out what their needs actually are.
So the kind of scenario you're talking about is somebody who is agitated, perhaps maybe yelling at some people, or I don't know what the scenario would be. That might get a phone call. You're in LA near Skid Row, and that's just how many too many times you'd have to call. It was not going to happen.
There in 2022, the stats were 86,000 people experiencing homelessness in LA County, 68,000 unsheltered.
That doesn't even compute.
No, the police on Skid Row are doing absolutely the best they can,
Yeah.
but they are not bringing people inside in that regard.
Right. Wow. Well, is there anything, though, that in your couple of years working here that you've thought, I've seen a lot. It's nothing like Skid Row, but there's some things we could learn from that experience that we could use here in Nashville. What have you brought with you, or you hope to bring from Skid Row?
I'm just a collaborator at heart. I feel like if we all come to the same table and we bring our gifts and we sort out what we're good at and what we can do and how we can help, we're all trying to serve the same people. So I think before I came here, and I can't speak to the 71 years that Nashville Rescue Mission has been an organization, but I feel like we kind of did our own thing. We do a great job at a lot of things, but there wasn't that spirit of collaboration with, let's say, MDHA or Office of Homeless Services, which is a newer, entity. It wasn't a thing before that. But now that we have OHS and...
OHS?
Yeah.
What's that?
Office of Homeless Services.
Oh, I see. That's the abbreviation.
Sorry.
Got it. Which is under MDHA, or it's under
Metro Social Services.
Metro Social Services. Got it.
So I mean, all those things where it's like, listen, we don't put people into the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, but we want our people to be in HMIS because that's how they get on the housing list. So if you have a staff member who puts people into HMIS, then why don't you come to the mission and we'll give you an office space for a couple hours a week and you can work with our guests because we're trying to help the same people.
Yeah. Well, obviously people are people and we sometimes get territorial or have little turf wars, but coming in from the outside, what would be your analysis as to maybe why there hasn't been better collaboration and kind of serving, a homeless population?
I think we're all in this for the right reasons. Yeah. I mean, I'm on our shelter committee meeting, or I think it's called the SWAP committee through the Continuum of Care, Shelter, Weather, Outreach, and P.
We're not going to. Okay, we'll go with that for now.
Awesome. And we have monthly meetings and the people are rad. Like I love the people that we get to do this with and work alongside, even though we might be.
If you made a career out of this,
right.
Your heart's got to be there.
That's right. And if it's not, it's time to tap out. Let's just be real. Let's have some real self-examination and honesty. And if you're jaded and bitter, it's just, this isn't the work for you. We have a lot of staff who know. I mean, Nashville Rescue Mission, honestly, is one of the most incredible places I've ever worked at. And our staff are legit amazing. But you'll know if you're called and cut out for this kind of work, I would say within 9 months. So we have a lot of folks who's about that year mark, they're looking for something else, which is great. I mean, we don't want to be the stepping stone for everyone. But on the flip side of that, I've got my director of counseling has been there for 20 years. Some of our life coach and therapists have been there for 35 years. We know that this is so much more than a job.
Yeah. Yeah. Well. So the what do you see as the opportunity if there was better collaboration between all these entities? Some of them government, some of them kind of parachurch. I think you use and with the rescue mission, which it seems like you're saying has been a little bit isolated, even though it is the one who is providing emergency shelter in this city.
That's right. I would definitely see a gap between the local church and nonprofits or government agencies or things like that, where in that regard, there are some silos. I love what Room in the Inn does with their cold weather shelter, partnering with local churches, allowing them to open up their congregations to be volunteers and their sanctuaries to be sleeping spaces. That's rad. It takes so much coordination and work for them to do that. And the thing it's kind of a bummer is when there's a snowstorm, for legit, then the volunteers also can't get to the church. So you lose those beds.
Our church is often asked, hey, it's a snow day. Can anyone do Room in the Inn tonight at our church?
That's right.
Because when it's really bad, even the volunteers can't make it. So I guess that means they're coming to you. Absolutely.
Yeah. And even the cold weather shelter, the overflow shelter run by the city, they say that they're the overflow shelter for Nashville Rescue Mission. So on the news, it'll be go to Nashville Rescue Mission. And I mean, yes, of course, that's who we are, but we don't take any government funds.
Do you think people would be surprised by that? Almost think that you all are some kind of governmental entity?
Yes. I'm not surprised that people would think that.
And maybe, I mean, it's almost nice to have somebody from the outside come in and look at this. Why doesn't Metro government fund you? They clearly lean on you.
Well, they do for not only just cold weather, but any severe weather.
Yeah.
Tornado, I mean, the heat. There's so much weather here. Can we talk about that, please?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's so hot. Or
well, you
it's
came from
freezing
LA,
cold.
okay? You came from LA, where it's mild and beautiful all the time,
That's
or at least
right.
that's the impression we all
sunny,
get.
70 and sunny.
Well, there's some ideas floating around that we need. Because I don't know how folks at the rescue mission feel, but when I, let's say, volunteer doing Room in the Inn, which is so easy, 12 guys at our
100%.
church, you could see why a smaller group is much easier. I mean, most of those guys are like, I don't want to be in the mission, and they sort of explain, and I'm sure they've had some sort of bad experience or something. But, hundreds of folks overnight in one place is tough. Is there something in the future that would be more like 25, 50 people? Is there a reason we wouldn't have smaller emergency shelters?
There are a few agencies that are considered emergency shelters, like Safe Haven. There's a few, right? But you still have to have a referral. So you can't just show up. Like we take people. We do intakes 24/7, 365.
Yeah.
In order to get into some of these other agencies, you have to be in HMIS. You have to be in coordinated entry. You have to have a number. You have to have a ranking. All your paperwork is in. And then when an opening comes up, then you're matched with that rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, whatever that is, whatever the type of housing that is that you qualify for, then that's where you go until you get permanent housing.
Mm-hmm. In other words, there is a little bit of a clerical barrier between I guess Room in the Inn in the cold months, you've got to get a number, and your number's got to be called, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, we're going to get into housing first a little bit later this hour because, this issue that you bring up is such an interesting one. And I love that you say there's just got to be room for the whole continuum. And listen, time is flying. And I'm sorry, we're going to have to take our first break. Joy Flores, who we've been talking to, is Vice President of Ministries with the Nashville Rescue Mission. We're going to take our first break here. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation, hear a bit about Joy's personal connection to homelessness. So stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. If you're just joining us, our guest today is Joy Flores, Vice President of Ministries with Nashville Rescue Mission. We are, hearing it all. Her take on coming from Skid Row to Nashville, and we want to take a moment here to kind of hear a little bit about her life. Coming here from after living, I think, born and raised in Los Angeles, and spent 2 decades working on the issue of homelessness as well as foster care. So, Joy, back us up for a little bit. How did you get into this work?
That's a great question. I think it definitely, when we talk about longevity, the folks who really have dedicated their entire lives to this have some sort of personal connection. That proximity really fuels the passion that gets you up and out of bed every single day. I am the youngest of 3. I have an older brother and sister. And when my brother was 16, he was a cute kid, athletic, fun, outgoing, charismatic.
He's older or younger?
Younger. Okay. And when he was 16, he was, started acting out at a younger age. My parents were like, what are we, a teen boy. But it was a little bit more significant than that. And so he was finally diagnosed, dual diagnosis, bipolar schizophrenic at 16. And then it was in and out of treatment centers, multiple suicide attempts. I mean, my parents really tried everything they possibly could. And it was always, there were glimpses of hope. Like he got married, had a kid, kept a job. And then it was just, we're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. He was in and out of halfway houses, lived on Skid Row. And when he was 30, he went missing. No one knew where he was. And eventually they found his body at the morgue, but that he had passed away on the streets, like literally like a quarter of a mile from where I ended up working. I wasn't working there at the time.
Yeah.
So my question has always been, where was the church? I mean, especially when we talk about those volunteer groups, it's like there are so many volunteer groups that are there, but are they leading with relationship? Are they using the currency of trust? Are they bringing folks to long-term services that will actually help them?
Why is your first thought to go to the church? And I do want to talk a little bit about yourself as you're a pastor, correct?
Yeah, man.
So in other words, I don't want people to hear like, oh, this person who's kind of works in this secular nonprofit world is calling out the church.
Okay.
So when you say, where was the church? Yeah, what do you mean?
I love the local church. I think the local church is plan A. I champion the local church. We need the local church. Even at Nashville Rescue Mission, obviously we're a Christian nonprofit, but we're not a church. And we want our guests and participants to be discipled in the local church, growing in a life of worship, finding those sacraments and being baptized and all that kind of stuff in deep community that they can have outside. When they leave the mission, they can learn those skills and tools and be connected to the body. And so that is actually a very poignant question that you say. Why would I say that? As a pastor, I was a local outreach pastor for a bit, and I was in charge of like the back to school drive, which are great things. I say that somewhat sarcastically. But one of my last positions was I was transitioning into pastor of restorative justice. And it was these deeper restorative ministries that really captured the essence of who I was and the heart of our congregation. It was a big multi-ethnic church. And so we looked at things like, my pastor came to me and he said, I want to start a church in a prison. I'm like, what are you talking about? Okay, what does that even mean? And not that I don't think, walking the rows and evangelizing to people is not important. Of course that is, but then what, right? So then we started looking at the pipelines to prison and, education disparities, and foster care was a huge one. And I had worked for an adoption agency for 5 years out of grad school and understood the complexities of trauma and the family, unit and things like that. And then sex trafficking, homelessness obviously is a big one. 60% of folks who are in foster care end up homeless. And it's like one bucket just fills the next in these pipelines. And so that's why those are the things where it's like, you have so many people, you see Jesus's heart moved with compassion and he acts, right? So you have all these people, and especially here, coming from LA, there's tons of churches. The majority of them are empty.
Yeah.
Here, there are tons of churches. They have police escorts to get the people out of the parking lot.
So you've noticed.
Yeah.
I've wondered if people think of the, there's a bit of an afternoon rush, Sunday at noon.
That's
and
right.
When you drive down Franklin Road or something, you'll see it.
Sure.
So you're saying we're actually fortunate that, yes, while you'll hear folks who are in pulpits, complain that churches are shrinking or whatever, like, listen, come from where I am, they're empty. So
That's right.
You've got people, they feel called to do something,
That's right.
So do something better, it sounds like you're saying.
Well, I just say, do something that focuses on the relationship.
Yeah.
If you're only, those mercy ministries, the food, clothing, shelter, those immediate needs, they are part of that continuum, but they can't be the focus. Like when I ran homeless outreach, I had volunteers who would argue about the menu, and they would stand in the line, and they spent all this time and their own money cooking, but they would never leave the serving line.
Yeah.
They would just scoop the things on the plate. And it's like, get out of the line and go sit with the people, learn their stories, build their trust. Come on.
That's the hard. Really.
That's right. It's super uncomfortable.
How have you seen it people kind of break out of that? I mean, I think there are folks like yourself who I can tell, I've never seen you in action, and I know that you're the person going around making small talk, being encouraging, even when you're, being able to talk kind of across that divide. For folks who are not comfortable with that, how do you get comfortable?
Yeah, it's the proximity to pain, and you've got to, I think it takes practice. But also, too, I'm not saying every local church needs to now all of a sudden have all of these things, right? It's like, no, come to Nashville Rescue Mission.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
We have the food. We have the food. We need people to chop the onions. Like legit. Like we're feeding. This week we had 863 people.
Wow.
In one night.
Who are, because I think a lot of, especially if you're maybe at a church who does room in the inn, you kind of think of, the only time housing's needed is when it's cold. Guess what? The rescue mission's hopping tonight.
That's right.
Wow.
Yes, it will be.
Well, all right. I hate to get ahead of ourselves here. So walk me back here. Your brother died. Do we even know how your brother died?
He had kidney. I mean, we say complications of homelessness. I don't think he OD'd. My dad was really worried that would have been the leading cause. But when you leave someone outside, they're devastated in every way.
Yeah.
Physically, emotionally, mentally, vocationally, educationally.
Yeah.
The whole gamut.
Wow. So was this, obviously it's not like you didn't see something like this coming, and yet I'm sure it was a life-changing moment. Did you then turn from this work into something that's more specifically directed at homelessness?
I was on Skid Row for 9 years as a bus pastor with a big organization out in LA. And so I was at a homeless hotel. They call them SROs, single room occupancy hotels. And I was dealing with mainly families, kids who were homeless, little kids. We'd bring them to church, we'd feed them. We'd make sure they were getting, school. We'd do after-school tutoring. We'd go to them. We know transportation is a big barrier. And so I did that day in and day out for 9 years.
You're saying you did that after your brother's death?
Yeah.
Before?
Yeah.
And was it sort of to say, there's a bunch of people just like my brother out here?
100%. And he comes from a family just like mine.
Right. Well, I think probably people assume when someone has such challenges, there must be a long backstory of trauma, and I know that sometimes there is, and sometimes it's folks like your brother.
Right. Well, and I think there's a lot of misconception where they're lazy, they don't want to get a job, all those types of things. That might have been the case for the majority 15, 20 years ago. Now that is not the majority. It is severe mental illness. We have, and I think I've mentioned this a few times, kind of my soapbox this past year is we have had 3,600 medical and mental health referrals from hospitals because you can't discharge someone experiencing homelessness to nowhere when they're leaving the hospital. So we have a referral process that we set up with them, and they tell us why this person is leaving the hospital. Maybe they're a fresh amputee. Their coloscopy bag is this, many, many reasons. Or they've been in a 51, I don't know what you call it here, 5150, 72-hour psych hold from a psychiatric hospital. And so they send them to Nashville Rescue Mission.
You're saying Vanderbilt's got your number.
They do.
And when somebody
and
doesn't...
all of the other 50 of them do too.
Yeah, and you're saying when someone doesn't have home because they're not allowed to discharge somebody who needs shelter, maybe anyone, I don't know, maybe that's what you're saying, but they essentially discharge them to the mission.
Yes. And so when I'm referring to folks who are like lazy and don't have a job, that might be for us, I would say 15% of our demographic. Yeah. Where 60% are severely mentally ill, unmedicated. So now, we're not the professionals. We're a Christian nonprofit, really, right? But in that spirit of collaboration, I'm like, dude, mental health co-op, Centerstone, neighborhood health, like, come on, let's sit at the table and figure out how we can help each other and help these people who are coming to us in total crisis.
Yeah. I mean, neighborhood health, they have a clinic right down by you, right?
That's right. They're awesome.
Yeah.
They help us tremendously with our medical needs. They're literally they make themselves available to us. They lead with relationship magnificently.
Yeah. Well, so talk to me about since I'm kind of want to focus for a second on your own journey in doing this work. I mean, you've got 4 kids.
Yeah.
And you talked about moving here, during COVID because you got 4 kids. And of course, it's kind of crazy. Maybe life's a little slower here than in LA, or easier to get around town or whatever. Makes life easier. But your work could eat up every second of your day, and more than that, every bit of energy that you have. Like, how do you create some kind of boundary so you've got something for the fam?
When I was at my former employer, I was over a lot of things, and it was a much bigger organization, and I was burning my candle at both ends. I had a great staff, but my staff now are so incredible that I can delegate, that I trust them, that they're professional, they're educated. And again, I'm not saying anything against my previous folks. I love them. I still am in contact and communication and relationship with them. Of course, I mean, we were in the trenches together for so long. But here there's process and we're a well-oiled machine. And so it's a lot easier for me to say, hey, I got a football game tonight. Like, if there's an emergency, text me, call me. I'm always available, but I don't feel that mental draining of I'm always responsible for every little thing. And Glenn Cranfield, our CEO, he's legit the coolest boss ever. I mean, he trusts me. When you talk about trust, we think a lot alike. We come to the same conclusions in a lot of different challenges. And so I'm able to bounce ideas off of him and things, and he lets me go. He gives me clear boundaries, and he lets me operate within those guardrails. And it just frees me up to kind of step into the fullness of my own leadership, and do that for my own direct reports as well.
Well, it just seems like a career field where you could just give everything you have every single day. The problem's still going to be there tomorrow.
It will.
And so you've just got to almost, I don't know if pace yourself is the right mentality. But
I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned being in this for so long is that you cannot be a sponge. You have to be a mirror.
Oh. Well, tell me this, and then we may have to take one more, we do have to take one more break. Do you find yourself having to keep personal distance from the people you work with? Because it just seems like while you want to make relationship, it actually it can't be the deepest relationship.
That's right. You can't internalize it. I think, again, when you're talking about proximity to pain and trauma and things, and being loving and compassionate and kind, ministry is very vulnerable. And so when we're talking about restoring dignity in people and having them see their own value and worth and offering the atmosphere for healing to happen, that is very vulnerable and it's very intimate. And so I think it took me, when I was in my 20s, I was like total Messiah complex. I was going to save everybody, I'd be crying because this one person relapsed or something. I just took everything so personal, where now it's like I have healthy boundaries and I understand I can only create the atmosphere for God to do the healing. God is the one that does the healing, and that person has to be open to that timing and that healing. And so I just get to live my life bringing joy and thinking about divine creative solutions for our challenges and making systems and things like that for us to be more productive and help more people, but it's still one at a time.
Divine creative solutions. We're going to get in a little bit of the spiritual aspect and then move into a little bit of the technical policy aspect about housing first when we wrap up, but we need to take one more break. Joy Flores is our guest for the whole hour. Not much of that left. This is Nashville. She's the Vice President of Ministries with the Nashville Rescue Mission. So we're going to take one last break, and when we come back, you'll have more of Joy Flores. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer. and this is Nashville. Our hour with Joy Flores is bopping away. She's a pastor and vice president of ministries at the Nashville Rescue Mission. We've heard about her journey from working on Skid Row to, working not too far from Music Row here in Nashville. We've also learned about her personal connection to homelessness and losing her brother. And I want to pick up where we left off about, kind of bringing the church, Christianity, into homeless outreach. And maybe not just Christianity. How have you found, working with folks of all faiths on this pretty, I was going to call it a singular problem, it's really not, but this pretty complex problem that is everywhere?
Man, when you talk about that Imago Dei in people, it transcends
the image of
everything.
God.
That's right. And when you start looking at people in the eyes and you realize that their soul is longing for something, we're not trying to, well, I shouldn't say that because sometimes.
I hear you. But there is, the rescue mission is known as a place, let's say, when I do Room in the Inn, I'll hear guys say, we got to go to a service or something like that. They might feel a little bit, evangelized perhaps. Yeah. So I'm which is totally understandable.
Right. I mean, that's the foundation of everything we do. We're not a homeless shelter with a Bible study. We are a Christian nonprofit, yes, but everything we do is a tangible representation of the gospel. And we know, as long as we've all been in this work, that is what brings life transformation. We have our emergency shelter, but we also have long-term recovery programs for both men and women. It's a 7-month program, completely free. It's recovery, but we say it's not just for, obviously we have a lot of people who are addicts, but it's for anyone who's found their lives unmanageable.
Yeah.
And that, that tendency of addiction can show up in a million different ways. And when we get emails from folks who are married with kids and have this addiction and it's literally ruining their entire life, we know that if you don't address that, even if it's child complex trauma, if you don't get to the root of what is causing all of this destruction in their life, then it's not going to last. And we don't want them to come back. We want them to be open and honest and vulnerable in their own stories and go to those deep, dark places with the guidance of mental health professionals. We have licensed therapists who walk with our participants. They have personal one-on-one hour-long therapy once a week. And because of our donors, it's free.
And tell me about the funding for the rescue mission, because it's not funded by Metro government. And not, I don't think much of any government grants, correct?
None.
So are there big churches that fund it, or is it really individuals who give directly to the mission?
It's all the above.
Yeah.
We definitely get grants from foundations who are aligned. Maybe it's specific to recovery, or once our participants graduate from the recovery program, they can stay in our transitional housing for 12 to 18 months as long as they're working full time, saving, debt reduction. We've had guys leave that signed mortgage, one guy signed mortgage papers. What?
He got out of the program, you're saying, and bought a house.
Yes. Wow. This is incredible. Yeah. That's the kind of long-term engagement that we're talking about. But yeah, our donor base is individual mailers that, those things you get in the mail, people actually send us back. And it could be $10 a month.
Yeah.
But it's that consistent faithfulness from so many people who, whatever reason their hearts are moved with compassion it keeps us going and it's been 72 years.
Wow. Well, there's this popular idea that about housing first that, I recall, I don't know, it's probably 15 years ago where people here in town got very excited about this being the way that and you help me here if I'm misremembering how this goes, but basically we're going to get people in housing and then we're going to start to deal with the other problems because they need shelter.
Yes.
Tell me why, does that sort of align with what you're doing at the mission, or does it compete with you?
I definitely wouldn't say competing. I would say when you look at it as a continuum, when you say, okay, and I think housing first as a name has been misled. It's misleading because that's not really what they think. Even though the way you explained it is probably the exact way I would explain it, is housing is the focus. Housing ends homelessness.
Focus.
Yes, like we don't have enough housing. That's why we have so many folks on the streets. Well, that's part of it. But when the model is like 10, and this is not, across the board, but it's like if you have one person experiencing homelessness and you get them into housing, you have this wraparound team for each person that sounds dreamy. Like that's how you're going to keep this person into housing. So if they look at our model and say people are in shelter, emergency shelter until they're ready for housing, that might not be ever. Well, that's absolutely true because a lot of the folks at the mission cannot independently care for themselves.
These are the folks who you look at your numbers and realize they've spent 1,000 nights at the mission in the last few years.
That's right. And they're severely mentally ill or
You wouldn't want to have them alone in their place.
they would never be able to stay there. I mean, how are they going to pay the bill? There's so many things, like cook food with the stove, so many things, so many things that just really aren't safe.
Well, but it seems like there's such excitement about housing first, and I could imagine that even when it comes to the kind of thing that people want to support, that foundations want to get behind, that seems like this new idea that kind of is more attractive if you don't dig down a little deeper because it says, oh, we can say we housed people.
That's right.
And mission accomplished when you sort of see what the folks who are never going to be helped by that.
Right. Well, okay. So I, again, don't want to be political, but this is a great example. Okay. 4th of July. Yeah. Do you remember the 4th of July? There was a fireworks show and there was an encampment that was in like the fallout zone of the fireworks. And, Office of Emergency Management, I think that's what they are, OEM, they came, they went to OHS. They're like, listen, there's this encampment here. They can't be here. Well, it was a big deal, and it's a big deal. I mean, we're talking about this in all of our meetings still, and it's September.
You're saying on the 4th of July, having to do something with that camp is still,
Yes.
There's fallout. Okay.
Yes, because a lot, I don't know how many of them there were, but they housed them. It's like classic housing first, right? It's like, wait, all of you guys say you want housing first. Now, mind you, there was some prioritization things that people were upset about because it's true. There are people who've been waiting to be matched with housing for a year. And then, if I just go in this encampment, then I'm going to get instant housing, right? But then there were these conversations about, well, this person needs addiction help and they can't, then there were all these complexities where I'm like, that's exactly what we're saying. You've got a we say, this is a great analogy, I think that is stuck with me. We're like the emergency room. People are coming in, we're like, all right, listen, not that we're putting Band-Aids on bullet holes, but we want to get you to the surgeon.
Yeah.
Or the eye doctor, or whatever it is, but come inside.
And you're all the only ones who will take folks who maybe, have been sex offenders or something? I mean, there's...
That's another hot topic. Actually, Room in the Inn is, I think, one of the only agencies that will help them because our women and children's facility was torn down. And
that's one area you actually have to say no.
Yeah.
But that the Campus for Human Development Room in the Inn can say yes.
Yeah, and it's really been hard on them because that demographic, it's so hard to find next steps for.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really almost impossible.
Wow. Well, but I hate to throw you off your analogy here. Emergency room.
Yeah.
For the most part, you say, come in here, we'll figure out what you need.
That's right. And then we'll walk with you and get you to that next safe step, that permanent step, stability, but you've got to bring them inside in order for them to gain even an ounce of clarity to understand what they actually need. But again, we want to restore dignity. We don't want to have power over. We want to have power with. And so we're allowing our guests to vocalize what they want. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then let's help you make that happen. I mean, we have a traveler's aid program that if you're a guest of the mission and say you have a family member in another county, I don't want to say another state, but it does happen all the time. And if there's someone who will take you in and receive you, we ask them to financially participate in the smallest way. We want reunification. We will send you home.
Wow. And it's funny because I know there was a program like that I think the Downtown Partnership did for a while, and they were basically buying people bus tickets out of town who were almost like sitting on stoops. It did not go over well because it sounds
I can see why.
And yet I could see why if you could kind of broker a family reunification. might that be the best thing that could happen because they've got some sort of support?
That's right.
Well, there was also this idea, aside from Housing First, from a few years ago that you just don't hear people talk about, which is ending chronic homelessness. And I wonder if somebody like you who lives in it every day, is that a thing that it's valuable to even talk about, aspire to end chronic homelessness? Or is it just something that's going to be with us and it's about how to manage it?
Well, in the 80s when Reagan closed all the psychiatric wards and pushed all those people to the street, we're still feeling those effects. So I think when you talk about chronic homelessness, some of these folks have been homeless for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
But, again, I think if we come to the table, we can solve all these things. But there are folks who are absolutely shelter resistant. There are folks who intentionally choose not to come to the mission. Like you were mentioning earlier, maybe have a story from 10 years ago, or they say they're barred, or we hear that all the time. Oh, I can't go. Well, you don't know that, right?
Yeah.
Like, let's have a conversation. Maybe something happened 10 years ago that did get you barred. And maybe we can have a conversation and revisit that.
Yeah.
We live in the gray.
So if anybody says that they've been barred, the answer is their name is not on a list, most likely. Okay.
Well, it might be.
But you're saying... Well, I like your realness, Joy. We only have a few more minutes with you here on This is Nashville. And thanks to listeners for tuning in and enjoying this conversation with me. And I wonder if these competing philosophies, do they have to compete, or can one sort of see that we have this emergency room that has to be there and needs to be supported? There are also some experiments that can go on that we can kind of work together. And do you see an opportunity to work together in a more productive way?
When we talk about building systems and infrastructure and productivity, I think all that needs to be part of the conversation, but there is not one way into homelessness. So, it was funny, I was on this panel thing in LA with the director of LAHSA, it's kind of like their OHS in LA, but their budget's like billions of dollars with
Office
a B.
of Homeless Services.
It's like LA County Housing Authority or something.
Okay.
And the guy was like, this was probably 6 or 7 years ago, but he was saying, we really built the structure from like the top down instead of talking to someone who was on the street and then built the system from the bottom up. And so I think that proximity is exactly what has to happen. That's why I love, even on, the HPC and things, these planning councils that the city has, they have someone with lived experience. Like, that is important. The Homeless Planning Council, Homeless Planning Committee.
I see. Okay, but either way, a committee that's
right.
on this topic.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say. I think it's silly for us to say that our way is the right way and the only way, because we have to come to the table together and figure out, okay, great. So we've got these demographic groups, right? We have families. That's a huge problem. We've got a ton of families experiencing homelessness. We've got severely mentally ill. We have medically vulnerable and fragile. We know the two fastest growing demographics of homelessness in the nation are families and the elderly. So the silver tsunami will affect homelessness. So what are we going to do when the average age of someone on the street is over 60? That's different than a 22-year-old, right? So in that spirit of collaboration, let's all come together. What can you bring? We need people who are experts in those fields. And then, like geriatric psych beds. I'm like, this city needs geriatric psych beds. We have some older folks who have severe mental illness, and not that I want to institutionalize anyone, but this person will never be able to independently care for themselves. And we've got to do something about that.
Wow. And what if we don't? What is that?
Then they're going to end up like my brother.
Do you sense that even folks who are volunteers and work directly with you, that they see this as like a life and death kind of thing?
Yeah, because we've, a couple months ago, there was this young kid when we were talking about hospital discharges and the way we were trying to redo how we accept referrals, because we've had some hospitals who, even though we have a process, they still drop them off. And there was a kid, he hung himself in our parking lot. He had been discharged from the hospital, and within a few hours, we found him in our, what is happening? It's that serious. And, recently we had a staff member I mean, we've obviously taken severe security protocols to try to prevent this, but it was an isolated incident, and one of our staff members was shot 10 times in our parking lot.
Wow.
By a disgruntled guest who we asked to leave a restroom because it was cleaning time, and asked him to go to a different part of the building, and he didn't like that.
You were leaving us with some heaviness and seriousness to consider.
Sorry for sucking the air out of the room.
I'm tempted to leave on a light note, but to be honest, your spirit comes through. You're so cheery that I think this might be even the right place to leave it because it is a serious issue, and you've made your point beautifully here. So Joy Flores, Vice President of Ministries at the Nashville Rescue Mission, thank you for joining us on This is Nashville.
Absolutely.
All right, Nashville Public Radio. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio, and this is a show that is it was an episode produced by Josh Deepen, sitting across the glass from us there. It was directed by Tasha A.F. Limley. Our board operators, Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. You can also ask a smart speaker to play the latest episode or subscribe to see video from the studio when we've got it streaming at youtube.com/@WPLN. Conversation doesn't have to end right here. You can comment, tell us what you want to hear on the show by leaving us a message at 615-751-2500. We're also on the socials. Come and find us and comment. This is Nashville. I'm Blake Farmer. Go in peace.